Members of the General Assembly, as unusual as this setting is for a State of the State, let me say that it is good to be here in person. That's right. Last year, we stood together at the starting line of 2020, ready for a challenge, even more ready to leave our mark on what was sure to be a historic year for our state. Little did we know, the events that would take place just a few weeks after would set the tone for our year. An unimaginable one for us that included the rise of a global pandemic, devastating tornadoes, flooding, violence, unrest, an economic collapse, a downtown explosion, and witnessing our nation undergo painful turmoil at the highest levels of government. There have been heartbreaking losses. We mourn the more than 10,000 Tennesseans that we have lost in these deadly events this year. In many respects, what was optimism has become a tempered feeling of resolve and perhaps even cautiousness about what lies ahead in 2021 as we move forward but work to make sense of it all. Scripture has a lot to say about that crossroads and what to do on the heels of suffering. Where do we find promise in this season? The promise is found in perseverance, which produces character that leads to hope. Tennesseans will know tonight that tragedy has no hold on who we are or where we are headed. Tragedy will not define us. It won't rob us of the opportunity that 2021 holds. In fact, this year holds its own unique place in our history as we celebrate 225 years of statehood. Since 1796, our state has been the portrait of perseverance and character and hope because of everyday heroes, ordinary Tennesseans who are more than constituents. They are the strength of our state and the lifeblood of our country. From early settlers, the farmers and factory workers and teachers and tradesmen and doctors and pastors, we will celebrate that since 1796, the ordinary has made us extraordinary. And remember that generations before us haven't just weathered, but excelled in the cycle of perseverance, character, and faith. I will once again travel to all 95 counties to reach the unsung people and places that make our state who she is. We'll do events in every county in Tennessee to celebrate the 225th anniversary, and I hope every Tennessean can join us at one of them. We'll kick off that year-long celebration in June, but in the meantime, we have a lot of work to do, starting with acknowledging this place and time where we are in COVID right now. It will soon be part of our 225-year history, and I want you to know where our response stands now and how Tennessee can beat this once and for all. Across the world, this pandemic has exposed that when the government feels unprepared, it's natural to have the temptation to think that growing the size of government and reaching for the nearest mandate will save everything, but not in Tennessee. The worldwide data on government success is mixed, but in Tennessee, our approach has been consistent. Maintain local control wherever possible. Rely on people more than government, and keep a primary focus on what we can directly impact. We chose a prudent structure in our unified command group and merged the role of public health, the National Guard, and our emergency management response. We built a strong infrastructure to deliver vaccines and tests directly into communities. And we worked in lockstep with our hospital partners. One of our first decisions was to double down on testing capacity, and we were consistently one of the early testing leaders across the country. We were one of the first to make free testing available to every resident, regardless of their symptoms and regardless of their insurance status. We were the first to purchase masks for every citizen. And as we watched disastrous outcomes at nursing homes all across this country, we were one of the first states to test every nursing home resident and every staff member as well, ahead of the federal mandate. And this decision paid off, as Tennessee had a lower fatality rate, a much lower rate than the country as a whole in long-term care facilities. And that fatality rate is not just a statistic. It equates to hundreds of lives saved, thanks to the swift work of state and local government and of long-term care facilities and nursing homes across the state. Protecting the vulnerable has enabled us to continue the most critical functions of our society, including educating our kids. I am proud of our schools and our collective decision to follow the science when it comes to getting our kids back into the classroom. As of today, 146 of 147 of our districts have in-person option for students. And that choice is so critical for our kids. We were the first state to send monthly deliveries of PPE to teachers and classrooms. And more importantly of all, after 2 months of the commencement of vaccine distribution in America, Tennessee is leading again. We have consistently been in the top 10 for vaccine distribution nationally, and we expect that to continue in the weeks and months ahead. And good news doesn't always get noticed, but our vaccine distribution plan was recognized by the former CDC Director Redfield as the most medically sound and practical plan in the country. We are getting shots in the arms of Tennesseans who need it the most. And despite the challenges associated with COVID-19, we have managed these challenges with very limited restrictions on Tennessee businesses and citizens. And when they were required, they were targeted and temporary. You may remember the last time I addressed Tennesseans was the week before Christmas. A post-Thanksgiving surge had threatened to push our hospitals to the brink. And at that time, Tennessee had a greater number of new COVID cases per capita than anywhere in the world. There was more pressure than ever to implement lockdowns and mandates and stay-at-home orders, but we chose to trust our people. We encouraged people to gather differently in their homes for holidays, and Tennesseans responded and helped us blunt a post-holiday surge. Our cases have plummeted, down more than 2/3 since our peak 6 weeks ago. And more importantly than that, our hospitalization numbers have sharply declined as COVID cases in hospitals have dropped more than 60% since our peak. And we have had this success thanks to the people of our state and the brave service of our healthcare workers. So I want to say directly to them, thank you. The successes that we are seeing now is because of their diligence and sacrifice. I also want to thank our team of public health professionals and the members of the Unified Command Group who have been common sense partners despite very harsh critics. I also want to thank the Tennessee National Guard, soldiers and airmen. That's right. Soldiers and airmen have been the face of service through natural disasters and through this pandemic, and we are so grateful to these men and women who stand at the ready for our state. Deregulation has been one of the most single important functions in our pandemic response. One critical role of our executive orders has been to make it easier to do business amid the pandemic, increasing the availability of telemedicine services, delaying driver's license renewals, allowing for transparent virtual meetings for local governments. Just a few examples of that deregulation. Our ability to deregulate and pivot quickly has saved lives. Another critical role of our executive orders has been to access needed federal dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in emergency funding that relies on state of emergency declaration. And one last thing on this subject of executive orders that's very important to me. Our executive orders explicitly protected houses of worship from being regulated or shut down in any way. Our response has been effective, and as cases have dropped, many sectors of our economy are roaring. In fact, many segments of our economy are more prosperous than they were this time last year. In the worst of the economic phase of our pandemic, our unemployment climbed to 15.5%. Today, it's at 6.4%. We created the Tennessee Talent Exchange, which connected unemployed workers with jobs. Our workforce participation rate has improved drastically over the past year. It's better today than it was before the pandemic. And we have now exceeded the national average in workforce participation for the first time in 25 years. But some of our industries are struggling, and we have spent long hours and hundreds of millions of dollars to help Tennesseans keep their businesses. In June 2020, the Tennessee Business Relief Program was launched. A total of $200 million in business relief payments has been distributed to over 27,000 small businesses in Tennessee. In October of 2020, the Supplemental Employer Recovery Grant, or SURGE program, was established. $125 million of the coronavirus relief funds has been reserved for this program, and to date, $30 million has been distributed in grant funding to 1,300 businesses. A strong economy means many things for Tennesseans, and one of them is low taxes and fiscal stability for their government. A recent report shows that Tennessee is one of only 7 states to have positive economic growth since April of 2020, when much of our economy was shut down. 1 of 7. We have cut a number of taxes since taking office 2 years ago, and we're recognized now as the 3rd least taxed state in the nation. And you are to be congratulated for that. I thank the General Assembly and the constitutional officers for that accomplishment. Comptroller Wilson and Treasurer Lillard have been fierce guardians of our strong fiscal position. I especially want to thank Justin Wilson for his years of service. And we welcome you, Comptroller Mumpower, to build upon that legacy. Likewise, our fiscal stability and management have again won high praise even this year, when many states are dealing with budget crises on top of other challenges. We have worked with members of the General Assembly to create the Financial Stimulus Accountability Group, which has ensured good stewardship of federal dollars that have come our way. This group has been both a bipartisan effort and a fully transparent effort to ensure that it's open to the public and to the press. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor McNally, Speaker Sexton, Senator Watson, Senator Ackberry, Representative Marsh, and Representative Love, who each served on this committee. Thank you for your partnership in this endeavor. We've taken a fiscally conservative approach throughout this past year, maintaining strong reserves and budgeting for conservative growth rates. Indeed, our budget is strong, and the differences are stark when you compare our state's conservative budget to states with very different approaches. But a strong budget isn't just about bragging rights. A strong budget allows us to be good stewards of what the taxpayers have entrusted to us. Those of us who have run a business know that deferring maintenance is a bad idea always. And therefore, we've ignored this temptation to put off these projects in the midst of economic uncertainty. In this year's budget, we're proposing the largest capital maintenance budget in our state's history. More than $900 million in capital improvements and maintenance on both state buildings and higher education campuses. We're also eliminating the backlog of deferred maintenance on our treasured state parks with a $30 million investment. Addressing maintenance is the fiscally responsible thing to do. We're also meeting other important obligations in our budget. We will fully fund the BEP funding formula and the THEC outcomes-based formula, ensuring that our students are put in the best position possible to recover from the pandemic. And when the dust settles on this year, our combined rainy day and TennCare reserve funds will be $2 billion, the largest in the state's history. We proactively used our state's federal relief dollars to ensure the solvency of our unemployment trust fund, which would minimize the tax burden on employees and encourage hiring. As a result, while over half of the states in this country have lost more than 75% of their trust fund value, Tennessee enters 2021 fully solvent at the lowest employer tax rate. To put that in practical terms, prudent management of the Unemployment Trust Fund has staved off a projected 300% tax increase on Tennessee employers for unemployment insurance. Now, more than ever, we can look at our economic situation and our economic forecast and say, it matters who governs, and conservative principles work. Our budget situation allows us to stand up here after a very challenging year and recommend a number of bold proposals for your consideration. But before I do that, let me say a word about the recent special legislative session. We met here 2 weeks ago for a historic special session. It was bold, and it will change the lives of our children. I won't reiterate our accomplishments there, but I will add that the work continues for teacher pay compensation. During the special session, we allocated almost $43 million for teacher pay raises, and that was a step in the right direction. And the budget I'm submitting for your consideration this week recommends an additional $120 million be set aside for teacher compensation in the 21-22 budget. This year has already brought other historic successes as well. After a year and a half of negotiating, Tennessee recently became the first state in history to receive a Medicaid block grant waiver from the federal government. This waiver will allow those in our Medicaid population to reap the benefit from our state's strong fiscal management of the TennCare program. It will also require us to meet a number of quality metrics, so we ensure that the savings will not be accrued by cutting back on the number of people we serve or compromising the services that we currently provide in any way. And furthermore, I'm committing today that we will use the shared savings to do important work like shortening the waiting list for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities who need services. And let me be clear, if partisan attacks that call for this block grant to be rescinded prevail, the state will not get those shared savings dollars that we plan to use to improve health care for vulnerable Tennesseans. This block grant is a big deal, and I'm proud of it, but it's not all that we're doing in health care across Tennessee. My budget proposal includes $6.5 million to extend postpartum coverage to all women receiving TennCare benefits from 60 days to 12 months, to increase This will increase access to care for new moms. And we're making an additional $2 million investment in our healthcare safety net so that those without health insurance have a place to go when they need it. We're also adding $6.5 million to our mental health safety net, which will be focused on providing services for school-aged children struggling with mental health issues. I mentioned partisanship earlier. I want to address the recent election. There was no greater stage for partisan politics than the final months of 2020. Partisan divides impacting almost every aspect of American lives. I have great concerns about our country's faith in the integrity of our election process. Thankfully, our state has stayed well above that controversy. If every state ran their election process like Tennessee, there'd be no delays and no scandal. And I want to thank Secretary Hargett for your leadership to ensure that Tennessee elections do have integrity and that we do our part to protect the democratic process. And with the elections behind us, we will watch with patriotic skepticism to see if politicians in Washington try to force more government on the states than the 10th Amendment allows. Tennessee knows what we need a lot better than the federal government does. Perhaps one of the most important lessons that's come out of this season is the lesson that Americans need to better understand how their government works. 2 years ago, we created the Governor's Civic Seal to ensure that we raise a generation of young people who are knowledgeable in American history and confident in navigating their civic responsibilities. This year, we're expanding that initiative. Using federal dollars, we're doubling the number of schools participating in the Civic Seal initiative, which will ensure that thousands more students get better civics education in Tennessee. And going forward, we're developing a set of instructional materials that will be free to districts so that ultimately every school can earn the governor's civic seal at no cost. As we look to the regular session that you will begin tomorrow, we have conservative proposals for your consideration that'll reduce crime, get our economy back up to speed, especially in rural Tennessee, and support strong families. Our proposals honor the individual, yet benefit the state as a whole, and they leave us well positioned for the recovery that's already begun all across our state. As you all know, rural Tennessee is very close to my heart, and making it stronger is a major priority for my administration. Revitalization starts with economic development, and quality economic development is about investing directly into the communities. So we've proposed $21 million to invest in rural communities and distressed counties to directly support rural infrastructure, industrial site development, small business development, and revitalizing small-town main streets. And whether it's running a small business or accessing virtual learning or accessing healthcare via telemedicine, slow internet speeds have many in Tennessee left at a disadvantage. I've proposed record investments in broadband since becoming a governor, and I'm grateful for this legislature's support on that issue, but I'm ready for us to solve this issue once and for all. A significant one-time investment combined with significant private investment will get broadband to just about every community in Tennessee, and tonight, that's exactly what I'm proposing. To help us achieve our goal of every Tennessean having access to high-speed broadband, my budget will recommend a historic investment of $200 million. Broadband expansion is important to improve educational outcomes, and we are doing that in other ways as well. As you know, I've strongly advocated for the expanded use of public, private, and nonprofit partnerships that empowers the private sector to help us achieve important objectives without being hampered by red tape and bureaucracy. So this year, we're proposing a new partnership with the Ayers Family Foundation to create a first-of-its-kind rural education partnership that will improve both the college-going and college success rate of students in our rural communities. This is a proven program that's already serving thousands of students, and I know that they can do even more with our support. Even as we launch new programs like this, programs that we've launched in the last 2 years are already paying off for our kids. We funded 28 projects in 18 at-risk counties through the Governor's Investment in Vocational Education Act, the GIVE Act. These projects created a new template for vocational education in this state, and we owe it to our students to keep that momentum going, even during the pandemic. This year, I'm proposing an additional $10 million to create 10 new GIVE sites with a priority on distressed and at-risk communities with the greatest need for workforce revitalization. Last year, the Future Workforce Initiative that I proposed and you enacted trained more than 200 teachers in STEM CTE programs, expanded access to AP computer science courses by 75%. Apprenticeship Tennessee is our statewide initiative to advance apprenticeship opportunities for employers in every part of the state. It's working. We have, right now, the highest number of Tennessee apprentices in a decade. That is grassroots workforce development, and it's starting in our classrooms. While we've strengthened specific aspects of rural education, we've invested in our urban centers as well. More than $20 million in federal grants will largely support added tutoring and technology for students in our urban centers. The reason that we place so much focus on education is because students should be prepared for productive lives, not just the latest standardized test. Commissioner Swin and I were recently discussing how the mission of the Department of Education should be simple. Students should be prepared for life beyond the classroom. Our education policy impacts our kids today, but other policies dictate what sort of state our children will inherit tomorrow. And that starts with how we approach families in our state. You already know that I am strongly pro-life, and I will continue to defend this position. Last year, I stood before you and presented one of the most aggressive pro-life bills in the country, and that bill passed, and it was an important day for our state, and certainly a memorable one for me. But being pro-life isn't just about defending the unborn. And we must also think about how to use our passion for this issue to improve the lives of struggling families. My administration is preparing a number of new initiatives that we'll announce throughout the year that will make Tennessee a national leader in foster care and adoption. We're partnering the Department of Children's Services, our faith-based office, and several third-party stakeholders to create partnerships with families and churches across our state that will move us toward the goal of every child in Tennessee having a loving home. No doubt that one of our goals must be fewer broken families, but there are things that we can do to make the foster and adoption system work better when families do break up. We're proposing a TennCare coverage extension for adopted youth that will allow them to retain their TennCare eligibility until age 18, regardless of federal or state adoption assistance eligibility. This extension will allow them to have a seamless transition into their new families, retaining existing physical and mental and behavioral health services, and reducing the fiscal burden of adoption on their new families. Another key part of our efforts to support children and families is within the Governor's Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. Among other successes this last year, the Faith-Based Office played an important role in engaging our local faith communities to help connect people with employment opportunities. But as we've seen over the past year, there are times when Tennessee families need an extra hand to make ends meet. We have an opportunity to deploy resources and help those families by modernizing the more than $700 million in our temporary assistance for needy families funding. Between the efforts of the TANF Working Group and our new Human Services Commissioner, Clarence Carter, I believe that we have a transformational solution to modernize TANF. Our proposals provide families a pathway to prosperity, while enhancing protections against fraud and waste and abuse, by incentivizing education and apprenticeships, and increasing the allotment amount for working families, and improving stakeholder engagement, all while strengthening the program's integrity. Tennessee families also deserve safe neighborhoods, and I will again bring forward legislation that will help to accomplish that. You've heard me say many times that we have to be tough on crime and smart on crime. This legislation will look familiar to you. It was moving through committee last year when we had to set it aside for our COVID-19 response. In addition to that legislation, we've included $4.7 million for additional day reporting centers and evidence-based programming for community supervision. This approach will ensure that re-entry to society is done in the safest and most effective way possible for those who were formerly incarcerated. Safe neighborhoods require well-supported and well-trained law enforcement as well. And we've made a number of important strides for criminal justice reform and police training this year. We know that law enforcement's a calling, and the men and women who take an oath to serve and protect deserve the best and most comprehensive training to benefit themselves and the communities that they interact with. We've improved training standards and paid for almost 100 cadets to attend improved law enforcement training at no cost to their local communities. We've added a new class of state troopers and 20 new TBI field agents. I think we can all agree that our law enforcement officials in our state have done an incredible job of protecting and serving the people of Tennessee. And now more than ever, Tennesseans want a strong commitment to the Second Amendment and the right to protect themselves. And as such, I will again be reintroducing constitutional carry legislation. Besides all these legislative proposals, I'd like to mention a few additional budget priorities before I close. I said at the start how proud I am of my cabinet and my staff, and I'm just as proud of all of our fellow co-workers, the best state employees in all of America. As with teachers, my budget recommends a 4% raise for state employees as well. And to help local governments and communities recover from COVID faster, we are proposing a $200 million investment in local government infrastructure grants. This funding will assist local governments with public safety projects, upgrades to utility systems and IT projects, capital maintenance projects, such as road improvements and new school construction and school renovations. We've worked for months to develop a budget for your consideration, one that is fiscally conservative, developed with a responsible attitude of stewardship of the hard-earned dollars of Tennessee taxpayers. This has been a very long and challenging year for our nation and for our state. There's been tragic loss of life and loss of incomes and loss of learning for our kids. In many respects, one of the most difficult years in recent history. But I've learned over my 61 years of life that God is a redeemer. He takes what is tragic and he makes it transformational. There are things that we never would have known, insights that we never would have been awakened to. Through times of trial, we become more purposeful, we become more resolute. We see things more clearly. We act with more intention. And we have a greater opportunity, more than ever, to seize the moment and shape the future. To see the needs of our neighbors around us, every single one of them, and to commit to serving them. Tennesseans, transformation will define us, not tragedy. And the state of our state is indeed hopeful. And I thank you for the honor that I have been given to serve alongside each one of you, this state and her people. I still believe, and I always will believe, in Tennessee. May God bless you, each one, and may God bless the great state of Tennessee. Thank you.
The purpose for which this joint convention was called having been accomplished, the joint convention stands dissolved.